Hi everyone, Omid from CodeLab here, and welcome back to the final video in our series on project management. And this one we'll be focusing on how to focus stories on one specific task. So when we create user stories as project managers, one of the biggest mistakes that usually occurs is creating very large stories that just have a lot of stuff inside of them. And what I mean by that is like you can create a story thinking, oh yeah, I just need like this one simple feature built. Like it looks pretty straightforward, probably just take us like 2-3 hours of work. And then what you fail to realize is that there's several big subtasks underneath that. Like you might need to create a few extra database calls, a few extra queries, stuff like that, that might add to that time and suddenly double or like even triple how long that user story takes. And this can cause a few negative effects. The biggest one, obviously, like time slowdown. You can't get everything that you thought was going to be getting done in that sprint done for that week, and now that's going to be negatively affecting all of your other weeks. It kind of demotivates developers when they realize, oh, I have this one task. It's going to take me like 10 hours. Oh man, that really demotivates people. So what we like to do when we create user stories, there's two things. The first is that stories should not have multiple pieces of functionality lumped into them. Each user story should really just represent one specific small task. And that kind of transitions me into the second part, which is small. We should not be giving people big tasks. I actually talked about story points earlier, and I'll talk about them again. But if a story's point value is greater than 5, you've probably done something wrong and you need to break the story apart. Because realistically, giving people big tasks, it's, again, like as I mentioned, just sort of demotivating, and it's really difficult because that also sort of enforces something where one person could become like the sole source of knowledge because they did a ton of work related to one task and no one else ever saw it. And so because of that, now they're the only person who really knows. They might have been demotivated and it could have taken them longer than we expected. And it was just never really clearly conveyed exactly what that story needs in order to reach its end goal. So the developer might have to make some inferences along the way. So if we have some huge big task, what we like to do, and obviously this is way easier said than done. This is a very difficult thing to do in practice. So I don't blame you if you sort of get lost or struggle along the way, because I know I do like all the time. It's how to actually break it apart and say, okay, this is one specific task. Does this task have a lot of subtasks underneath them? Like let's say, oh, I need to create my get all users call, like with this guy right here. Okay, well, this has like 5 things underneath it that all need to be done. Like I have to create some other API route that this one is dependent on. I have to create something to format my data to return it. I have to create something to also cleanse that data of any like misspellings or typos. Like, okay, that's a lot of things. Like just creating the get all users call is one thing, but all of those other like 3 or 4 things around it really add the time up, and it's a lot. So if there's a lot of those, let's break that one task to get all users out into multiple subtasks. You can actually do that directly on Jira. You can actually add subtasks that are linked back to the regular task. I would highly recommend doing this. And you can move those subtasks independently of each other. So like this one can be done and this one can still be in like the backlog, for example. It kind of makes it clear like how you're building out one specific task with all of its subtasks. But you do not want to leave all of that stuff just lumped into one big task. Really demotivating, just causes confusion. We've never really seen any success with not using this method, basically. And again, going back to the actual story point thing, so ideally you should be under 5. Like see this one right here is 2, that's pretty decent, but if it's greater than 5, maybe it's okay if it's like a rare case where like you can't break it up, but otherwise, like generally, if you're going over 5, you should probably try to break that thing down. Something else is also how we title our user stories. So I have a good example and a bad example here. So this bad example, obviously, create wireframe, that's just because that's very broad, very vague. But this good example, it's not only good because of how it breaks down like just like, oh, like this is only formatting the data from the get all users call, but it's also good because of its title. So the title itself should be something actionable. And this kind of relates back to the Gherkin method that we were using. You should be able to display your title as an action. So if you have some big story where it's like, oh, like we need like all of this stuff and you can't display it as one clean action in just one sentence, you've probably done something wrong. So this just says format data from get all users call. That's good. Now, if I had to say format data from get all users call and do this, you've probably done something wrong. You should break those 3 different and clauses up. Now, if the and clause is like super small, like it's like a 5-minute task, or like they kind of need to be completed together for like whatever like some specific reason, that's okay. Also, just something small, but it should be an actionable, like I mentioned, so you should have some verb in the front, like format, create, remove if you need to like get rid of or like clean an old piece of code out. Just something to keep in mind. And also, sorry for clicking off this, for the story point value, something to keep in mind when you're creating it is you should be taking everything into account. You shouldn't just say like, oh yeah, this code, I think it'll take me like an hour to write, because like I'm a pretty experienced developer, I know this tech stack, and I'm guilty of this all the time. Something that people often forget is the research and code cleanup that need to be taken into account. So if someone is really new and they've never made an API call before, they're gonna have to do some research beforehand to kind of get it all like down and just kind of, you know, sort of like really figure out like what it is that they need to do before they start coding. So you might need to add an extra hour on. Code cleanup as well. Like, you know, sometimes if it's like a big story code wise, like maybe there's not a lot of research, but it's like 3-4 hours of just like straight coding, that person's probably going to need time to clean their code up, make it look pretty, kind of do like some optimizations on it. So maybe give them like an extra half hour, an extra hour. And of course, like you are not going to be alone in this process. Like you will be talking with the developers and like you can communicate with them like, hey, I think this is 3 or 4 hours. You're the guy doing this story. Do you think so? Is this actually something that like you personally need like a ton of research, like a ton of like code cleanup time? Because if they do, then we can say, okay, maybe we break this up. Maybe we put 2 people on this story. Maybe we just up the story point value so that everybody knows and just sort of act accordingly from there. But that is it for all of the videos in our project management series. Thank you all, everyone, for watching so much, and hopefully I see you all again soon. Thank you.